The hum of the engines filled the cabin of Flight 287, a comforting white noise that contrasted sharply with the lively chatter of passengers boarding. Elena Harper stepped onto the airplane with an air of quiet confidence that turned a few heads. She wore a tailored blazer over a sleek black dress, her natural curls framing her face like a halo. In one hand she carried a leather laptop bag and in the other her boarding pass. Elena's demeanor radiated poise, her every movement deliberate yet graceful. As she walked down the aisle, her sharp, observant eyes scanned the seat numbers. Upon reaching her assigned spot in the first-class section, Elena politely nodded to a fellow passenger before placing her bag in the overhead compartment. She settled into her seat, pulling out a small notebook and pen, jotting down thoughts as if she were already strategizing her next big idea. To most, Elena appeared calm and collected, but her eyes held a subtle intensity, suggesting she was someone who did not take challenges lightly. Nora Blake, a seasoned flight attendant with crisp efficiency in her every movement, was making her way through the first-class cabin. Nora prided herself on her instincts, and today her gaze lingered a little too long on Elena. Something about the young woman unsettled her, though she couldn't quite place why. Nora hesitated before walking over to Elena's seat. "Excuse me," Nora said, her tone polite but edged with authority. "May I see your boarding pass?" Elena blinked, momentarily caught off guard but quickly recovered. With a calm smile, she handed over her ticket. "Of course," Elena replied, her voice steady and pleasant. Nora studied the ticket, her frown deepening. "This is for first class?" she asked, though the boarding pass clearly confirmed it. "That's correct," Elena said, her tone unwavering. After a brief pause, Nora returned the ticket and walked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. It was clear the interaction was far from over. Moments later, Nora returned, this time accompanied by a junior flight attendant. Her expression had hardened, her posture more commanding. "Miss Harper, could you step aside for a moment?" Nora asked. "I need to verify something." Elena's brows furrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. She stood, laptop bag in hand, and followed Nora to the galley. The whispers in the cabin grew louder as curious passengers exchanged glances. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to a different seat," Nora said, her arms crossed. "It seems there's been a mistake with your booking." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "A mistake?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "I booked this seat weeks ago and it was confirmed. Can you double-check?" "I've already checked," Nora said coldly. "This seat isn't appropriate for you. Please move to the main cabin." A flicker of disbelief crossed Elena's face, but she quickly masked it with a neutral expression. "I'm afraid I don't understand," she said, her tone measured. "My ticket is valid. Why would I need to move?" Nora leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Either you move or I'll have to call security to assist." Elena straightened her posture, her grip tightening on her bag. For a moment, the two women locked eyes, the air between them charged with tension. Then, without another word, Elena nodded and returned to her seat to gather her belongings. As she walked toward the main cabin, escorted by Nora, she felt the weight of the other passengers' stares. She kept her head high, her composure unbroken, but inside, a storm was brewing. Seated in the cramped middle row of the main cabin, Elena looked out the window, her expression unreadable. Her thoughts raced, oscillating between disbelief and determination. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and began typing a message. When she hit send, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the growing tension around her. A younger flight attendant, Sophia Rivera, approached cautiously, holding a cup of water. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Sophia asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. Elena looked up, her smile warm but restrained. "I'm fine, thank you. Just a bit of a mix-up, I suppose?" Sophia hesitated, sensing there was more to the story. "If there's anything you need, please let me know," she said before walking away. Elena's gaze returned to the window. Her mind was already piecing together the next steps. She wasn't one to let such an incident slide, but she also wasn't one to lose her temper. Precision over chaos, that was her approach. Back in the first-class cabin, Nora moved through her duties with a sense of satisfaction. She had dealt with the situation, or so she thought. Yet a nagging unease lingered. Elena's calmness had unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Meanwhile, Elena sat in her new seat, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest. Her calm exterior concealed a fiery determination. She glanced at her phone, reading the response to her earlier message. A faint smile crossed her lips. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as passengers settled into the rhythm of the flight. Elena remained still, her expression serene but purposeful. She pulled out her notebook and jotted down a single line before closing it with a decisive snap. Whatever her next move was, it was clear she was prepared for it. The steady hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as Flight 287 soared through the skies. In the main cabin, Elena Harper sat quietly, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. The tension from the earlier incident had not dissipated but instead simmered beneath the surface. She glanced at her phone, rereading the message she had sent moments ago. On the other end, someone was already working to address the injustice she had faced. Back in the first-class cabin, Nora Blake moved with forced composure, checking on passengers and handing out drinks. Yet, her confidence had begun to waver. Her instincts, which she prided herself on, were starting to feel unreliable. Every time she glanced toward the main cabin, she felt a gnawing unease. Nora couldn't shake the image of Elena's calm, steady gaze. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. It began subtly. Nora was in the galley, preparing for the next round of refreshments, when the intercom phone buzzed sharply. Startled, she picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Nora Blake?" "Yes, this is Nora," she replied, her voice faltering slightly. "This is the airline's executive office. We've received a direct complaint regarding an incident on your flight. Please ensure all passengers are treated with respect and refrain from further altering seating arrangements without proper justification. Upon landing, we'll require a full report." The weight of the words struck her like a blow. "Yes, of course," Nora managed to say, her voice trembling. As she hung up, the blood drained from her face. A direct call from the executive office was unprecedented, especially mid-flight. Nora glanced toward the first-class cabin and then toward the main cabin, where Elena sat. She suddenly realized that the young woman was far more influential than she had assumed. In her cramped seat in the main cabin, Elena observed the subtle shifts around her. The glances from other passengers, the subdued murmurs, they all confirmed that the earlier confrontation had not gone unnoticed. She leaned back, allowing her calm exterior to mask the storm of thoughts in her mind. Elena reached for her phone again. Her fingers moved swiftly, sending another message. This time, her instructions were precise and deliberate. "Begin monitoring the situation. Notify the board. This needs to be addressed immediately." When she hit send, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Everything was proceeding as she had anticipated. Nearby, Sofia Rivera, the empathetic junior flight attendant, noticed Elena's demeanor. Taking a deep breath, she approached Elena again, her kindness shining through the tension. "Ms. Harper," Sofia said softly, "I just wanted to check if you're comfortable. Is there anything else I can get you?" Elena's gaze softened. "Thank you, Sofia. You've been very kind," she said, her voice warm. Sofia hesitated, then added, "If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Elena repeated, her tone calm but laced with gratitude. Sofia's kindness reminded Elena of the power of compassion, even in the face of adversity. As the flight continued, the divide between Nora and Elena became increasingly apparent. In the first-class cabin, Nora's unease grew. She couldn't ignore the stern warning from the executive office. She sought solace in small tasks, like adjusting trays and refilling drinks, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying her inner turmoil. "What did I miss?" she whispered to Dennis Marks, the senior flight attendant. Dennis had been with the airline for years and often served as a mentor to the younger crew. "You missed a lot," Dennis replied bluntly, his voice low. "This isn't just a passenger, Nora. She's someone connected to the board." Nora's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Dennis crossed his arms. "I mean, you made a decision based on your gut and now you're dealing with the consequences. First-class passengers don't take kindly to being disrespected, especially when they have the power to make real changes." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "I didn't know." "You should have thought about that earlier," Dennis said, his tone sharp. "Now you've got to hope this doesn't spiral out of control." 5 minutes later, the cabin's intercom buzzed, announcing a routine message from the captain. As the flight continued, a new tension spread through the plane. Whispers among passengers grew louder as they exchanged speculative glances. Elena remained silent, her calm demeanor unshaken. She glanced at her phone again, reading a response to her earlier message. "Understood. Actions are underway. Stay composed." Elena closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. Her strategy was unfolding exactly as planned. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, the tension reached a breaking point when Dennis approached Nora with a serious expression. "The captain wants to see you in the cockpit," he said quietly. Nora froze. "Why?" Dennis shrugged. "Better not keep him waiting." With trepidation, Nora made her way to the cockpit. There, Captain Harris Connors, a seasoned pilot known for his no-nonsense demeanor, turned to face her. "Nora," Captain Connors began, his tone measured but firm, "I've received another call from the executive office. It seems we have a serious situation involving a first-class passenger. Can you explain what happened?" Nora hesitated, fumbling for words. I thought there was a mistake with her booking," she said weakly. "Did she have a valid ticket?" the captain asked pointedly. "Yes, but—" "There are no buts here," Captain Connors interrupted. "You acted without cause and now we're under scrutiny. Do you realize who she is? She's connected to the board of directors." Nora's face paled. "I don't know what you were thinking," Captain Connors continued, "but your actions have put this entire crew in a difficult position. You'll provide a full report upon landing. Until then, ensure no further issues arise. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Nora stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Back in the main cabin, Elena remained composed. She glanced at the window, watching the endless stretch of clouds. Her thoughts were interrupted when the man seated across the aisle leaned in slightly. "Hey," he whispered, "I saw what happened earlier. That wasn't right. Are you okay?" Elena turned to him, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm fine," she said simply. "Thank you for your concern." The man nodded, sensing that Elena was not someone easily shaken. Sophia passed by again, her gaze briefly meeting Elena's. Elena gave her a small, reassuring nod. As the flight neared its halfway point, a sense of anticipation filled the air. Unbeknownst to most passengers, Elena's complaint had triggered a series of actions that were already being discussed at the airline's highest levels. Nora, on the other hand, felt her confidence crumbling. Every glance toward the main cabin seemed to remind her of the mistake she had made. She tried to focus on her duties, but her movements were mechanical, her mind clouded with regret. Dennis, ever the observer, pulled her aside. "You need to fix this, Nora," he said. "How?" she asked, her voice filled with desperation. Dennis sighed. "Start by apologizing. It might not fix everything, but it's a step." Taking a deep breath, Nora walked toward the main cabin, a tray of sparkling water in hand. Her usual confidence had vanished, replaced by visible tension. She stopped in front of Elena's seat. "Miss Harper," Nora began, her voice softer than anyone had heard before. I wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part. Elena looked up, her gaze sharp but calm. A misunderstanding, she repeated, her tone measured. Yes, Nora said, her voice faltering. I hope you can accept this as a token of my apology. She placed the glass of water on Elena's tray table, her hands trembling slightly. Elena regarded the glass for a moment before looking back at Nora. Thank you, she said simply. But I think it will take more than a drink to fix this. The words, though softly spoken, hit Nora like a slap. I understand, Nora murmured. If there's anything else I can do, please let me know. Without waiting for a response, Nora turned and walked away, her cheeks burning with humiliation. As the flight continued, it became clear that the dynamic had shifted. Nora's unease grew with every passing moment, while Elena's calm authority remained unshaken. The seeds of change had been planted, but the storm brewing was far from over. Both women were now on a collision course with consequences that would reverberate far beyond the confines of Flight 287. And as the clouds parted to reveal the city below, the stage was set for the reckoning that awaited upon landing. The soft chime of the intercom signaled the plane's descent. Passengers shifted in their seats, fastening seatbelts and tidying up their belongings. From her seat in the main cabin, Elena Harper gazed out the window, her expression calm but resolute. The cityscape below grew clearer, signaling the end of the flight. But for Elena and Nora Blake, the journey was far from over. In the first-class cabin, Nora struggled to maintain composure. Her usual crisp demeanor had all but vanished, replaced by a mix of anxiety and regret. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her, compounded by the warnings she had received from the captain and the airline's executive office. Nora knew she had crossed the line, but she had yet to fully understand the extent of the consequences. As the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin erupted into the usual flurry of activity. Passengers retrieved luggage and prepared to disembark. Elena, however, remained seated, her movements deliberate. She retrieved her phone, typed a brief message, and sent it without hesitation. We've landed. Proceed as planned. At the front of the plane, Nora stood stiffly near the exit, her forced smile doing little to hide her unease. As passengers filed out, she thanked them with robotic precision, her eyes darting nervously toward the main cabin. Her heart sank as she spotted Elena rising from her seat, gathering her things with the same composed efficiency she had displayed throughout the flight. When Elena reached the exit, her gaze locked briefly with Nora's. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Nora swallowed hard, her voice faltering. Thank you for flying with us, Miss Harper, she said, her words trembling with an unspoken apology. Elena paused, her expression unreadable. I'm sure we'll be in touch, she replied, her tone calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. Without another word, Elena stepped off the plane, leaving Nora frozen in place. As the last passenger disembarked, two uniformed security officers entered the cabin, their presence commanding immediate attention. They approached Nora with purposeful strides. Miss Blake, one of them asked. Yes, Nora replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We need you to come with us, the officer said firmly. Nora's face paled as she was escorted off the plane. Her legs felt like lead as she walked through the terminal, past curious onlookers and whispering passengers. In a private meeting room at the airport, Elena sat across from Richard Hale, the airline CEO. The sleek, modern space contrasted sharply with the tension that filled the air. Richard, a man in his late 50s with a polished demeanor, leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the table. Miss Harper, Richard began, his tone carefully measured. Let me start by offering my sincerest apologies for the unacceptable treatment you experienced on your flight. I assure you, this matter is being taken very seriously. Elena met his gaze, her composure unshaken. I appreciate the apology, Mr. Hale, but apologies alone won't fix the underlying issues. This isn't just about me. It's about a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. Richard nodded, acknowledging her point. You're absolutely right. That's why we've already initiated a full review of our policies and training programs. I'd like your input on how we can make meaningful changes. Elena considered his words for a moment before responding. I want to see measurable progress, not just promises. A timeline for implementing these changes and regular updates on their effectiveness. This can't be another PR stunt. Richard's expression tightened, but he nodded. Understood. We'll provide you with everything you need to hold us accountable. The conversation continued, with Elena outlining her expectations in detail. By the time the meeting ended, there was a clear sense of purpose in the room. As Richard stood to leave, he extended his hand once more. Thank you for holding us accountable, Ms. Harper, he said with genuine respect. Elena shook his hand firmly. Let's make sure this becomes a turning point, not just a correction. Meanwhile, in another part of the airport, Nora sat in a sterile conference room, facing a panel of airline executives. The tension was palpable as the hearing began. One of the executives, a sharp-featured woman named Margaret Chin, led the questioning. Ms. Blake, we're here to address the incident on Flight 287 and the allegations of discriminatory behavior filed against you, Margaret began, her tone professional but unyielding. Nora swallowed hard, her palms damp. I understand, she said weakly. Margaret's gaze was steely. Let's start with your reasoning for removing Ms. Harper from her first-class seat. What justification did you have? I thought there had been a mistake, Nora stammered. I was just trying to follow protocol. According to our records, Ms. Harper presented a valid first-class ticket. At what point did you verify this before asking her to move? Margaret pressed. Nora hesitated, her voice barely audible. I didn't. The room fell silent, the weight of her admission hanging heavily in the air. Margaret leaned forward. Ms. Blake, the airline has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Your actions not only violated that policy but also jeopardized our reputation. Do you understand the severity of this situation? Nora nodded slowly, her heart sinking. I do. The panel continued questioning her, their tone firm but fair. By the end of the hearing, Nora felt utterly defeated. The final decision would be communicated to her later, but she already knew her career with the airline was over. Days after the incident, the airline announced sweeping reforms in response to the backlash. Mandatory sensitivity training, revised customer service protocols, and a new complaint handling system were introduced. The announcement was met with cautious optimism from the public, and Elena's role in pushing for these changes was subtly but respectfully acknowledged. Elena, however, remained focused on the bigger picture. She declined interviews and public appearances, choosing instead to work quietly with the airline's leadership to ensure the reforms were implemented effectively. For Nora, life after the airline was a stark contrast to the structured world she had known. Struggling with guilt and regret, she sought ways to make amends. Eventually, she joined a non-profit organization dedicated to workplace diversity and inclusion, using her experience as a cautionary tale. In one of her first speeches at the nonprofit, Nora addressed a small audience. I made assumptions that cost me everything, she admitted, her voice filled with emotion. But those assumptions also taught me a valuable lesson. Respect is not optional. It's a right everyone deserves. The speech marked the beginning of her journey toward redemption, a path she knew would not be easy but was necessary. Weeks later, Elena boarded another flight for a business meeting. As she approached the gate, the staff greeted her warmly, their professionalism a stark improvement from her previous experience. Once on board, Elena noticed subtle but meaningful changes. The crew was attentive, their interactions with passengers marked by genuine care. Among them was Sophia Rivera, now a senior flight attendant. When Sophia spotted Elena, she smiled warmly. Welcome back, Ms. Harper, Sophia said. Thank you, Sophia, Elena replied, her tone appreciative. As the plane ascended into the sky, Elena leaned back in her seat, a faint smile playing on her lips. The events of Flight 287 had been challenging, but they had also sparked meaningful change. For Elena, this was more than a personal victory, it was a step toward a better, more equitable future. And as she gazed out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, she felt a quiet sense of hope. The sky, she realized, was not the limit. It was just the beginning. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there, turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters.